Greetings, duelists of the guild. I am Harmac, the Fluffal Guru, and this is my Fluffal Crash Course. Now, I say Crash Course since it shall be a more simplistic look at the Fluffal archetype, and more complicated plays shall be saved for the replays later. Now, when I'm referring to Fluffals, of course, I'm including both the Fluffal monsters, edge imps, and the Frightfur fusion monsters, spells, and traps. It's quite a few packages that they have to stitch together via their search effects, and you might notice as we go through them they don't always come together. Now, Fluffals play rather unlinearly, and that means every game will be different. There aren't really any one card combos, maybe some 1.5 combos or ones that require 2 or 3. However, each Fluffal game does require you to achieve certain objectives, and that's what I've split up this course into, with the setup phase, extension, and then your end pieces. Now, sometimes extension can come a bit before the setup or etc., but it usually follows this said order. Now, starting with the setup, the most key part of Fluffal is Toy Vendor. And this is because every time Toy Vendor goes to the graveyard, you get to search either a Fluffal or Edge Imp Sabers. And this is not once per turn. Of course, this means if we send a lot of Toy Vendors to the graveyard, we net a lot of advantage. Now, how can we do that? Well, we can send, of course, Toy Vendor via Toy Vendor, and that shall trigger the effect. It doesn't matter if it's a cost or an effect, it shall trigger. However, we of course won't always have it in hand, so we can discard Fluffal Bear to set it from the deck. And if we do not have Fluffal Bear, then we can perhaps summon Fluffal Dog to search Fluffal Bear, and then we'll have Toy Vendor access. And so we essentially have like 9 copies of Toy Vendor and potentially more, as we shall see later. Now these of course get Toy Vendor, but they don't all send them to the graveyard. In Archetype, we also have cards like Fluffal Penguin, which draw cards and then discard, so you can potentially discard Toy Vendor. Our fusion monsters quite often destroy, so Frightfur Tiger here can be used to destroy Toy Vendor. And if there's a card on the opponent's side of the field, Cruel Whale can destroy both that card and a Toy Vendor on the field. And so we have quite a few ways of getting into the graveyard, but honestly, perhaps not quite enough, which is why sometimes we rely on out-of-archetype cards, like Eldritch the Golden Lord is the most famous example. With Eldritch, you can of course discard it and a Toy Vendor to out a card. You can also use Toy Vendor to discard Eldritch, and then use Eldritch's graveyard effect to then send Toy Vendor to the graveyard. And cards such as Diabellstar have a similar amount of effects. And of course we also have Unchained Soul of Shavara, which can destroy set Toy Vendors. However, all 3 of these monsters pale in comparison to Foolish Burial Goods, which allows us to send Toy Vendor from the deck to the graveyard, essentially making it a 1-card searcher. This can only be used once per turn. And so usually Fluffal plays will start with one of these plays in order to get Toy Vendor into the graveyard. Now, what is one usually searching with Toy Vendor? The answer probably will be Fluffal Dolphin. Now, Fluffal Dolphin provides the majority of your setup. It will reset your Toy Vendor, and it can also set a Fluffal monster or Edge Imp Sabers from the deck. And this enables the Fluffal Wings combo, which we shall get to shortly. Now, Fluffal Dolphin is essentially doing what Fluffal Bear and Fluffal Dog can do. So Bear can set the Toy Vendor, and Dog can search Fluffal Wings from the deck, and you can then discard it with Toy Vendor. However, since all of those effects are packed into one creature, Fluffal Dolphin is doing a lot more legwork than it would be to search both of these 2 separate pieces, essentially shortening your combo. Now, if you've already used the Fluffal Wings combo, or Fluffal Wings is already in your graveyard, you can always instead send Edge Imp Sabers for further setup, and from then on perhaps Fluffal Bear, or just some other Fluffal name. Now, why do we want Wings combo? Wings combo provides even more advantage by banishing Wings and a Fluffal monster whilst Toy Vendor's on the field, you send Toy Vendor to the graveyard, and then you get to draw 2 cards, and then of course you get your search with Toy Vendor. And this is massive for Fluffal. It's why their hands can get so big and they can churn through their deck so fast. And more importantly, these draws allow us to potentially draw our Edge Imp or Frightfur cards, or perhaps our non-engine. This is important because, as you may have noticed so far, Toy Vendor hasn't allowed us to search our Edge Imps that aren't Edge Imp Sabers, and none of these cards have allowed us to search our Frightfur cards specifically. And then usually once this portion of the game plan is done, we then move on to our extension. Now, the most famous card that extends Fluffals, of course, is Frightfur Patchwork. So good it's used in other archetypes, along usually with Edge Imp Chain. Now, it can search any Edge Imp and Polymerization, and fusing us allows us to extend even further. Edge Imp Chain, when it's sent to the graveyard from either the hand or the field, not from the deck. So from the hand or field, allows us to search a Frightfur card, and so usually Frightfur Patchwork and Chain are often used to search into each other. Now, how can we get Chain to the graveyard? Of course, we can fuse with it, we can send it to the graveyard via Toy Vendor, and sometimes we can have a Fluffal on field. We can use Fluffal Sheep to return that Fluffal to hand, and either bring Chain from the hand or the graveyard to the field, and then you may link it off, which shall trigger its search effect. And with Patchwork, we can make our Frightfur fusion monsters, such as Tiger, and more importantly, Whale. Now, Whale's a pretty important extender. It gives us the option, first of all, she'll trigger both our Fluffal Penguins and our Edge Imp Chains, etc. And then, when those are triggering in the chain, you can, with Cruel Whale, either choose to add Frightfur Repair with Edge Imp Chain's effect, and this can potentially recycle a Frightfur from the graveyard to summon a Fluffal back, or you can use Frightfur Cruel Whale's effect to send Frightfur Repair to the graveyard, and then you can banish this to potentially summon a Fluffal from your hand. And then, if all other options are used up, so Frightfur Repair and Frightfur Patchwork already searched, you can of course search Frightfur Fusion for more fusion plays to potentially crack your opponent's board. Now, the main way Fluffal boards are built is through Fluffal Penguin. We've already discussed that when it's used for fusion, it draws you and discards a card. However, it has another effect. When it's on the field, it can special summon a Fluffal from the hand, and this is soft once per turn. So this means every time a new Fluffal Penguin hits the field, you can use this effect again. And this is effective for making rank 4s and links. Now, how do we get Fluffal Penguin back onto the field? Of course, we can normal summon it, but Frightfur Repair can summon it from the graveyard, or it can again summon it from the hand. If we fusion summon to a zone that Cross Sheep points towards, we can bring it back in the graveyard again. And usually Fluffal Penguin's used for fusion material, so it's often in the graveyard. And then very occasionally, sometimes you'll top deck a Fluffal with the Toy Vendor discard, and this shall allow you to special summon a Fluffal. If you can, you would want to prioritize summoning Fluffal Penguin, since they'll allow you to special summon another Fluffal anyway. Now, typical other cards we shall special summon with Fluffal Penguin. Fluffal Dolphin, of course, is the best example, and this kind of shows you where the extension and the setup can bleed into each other. And then Fluffal Dog is the other obvious example, again another level 4, and Fluffal Dog can potentially search you into your Fluffal Sheep or into any other Fluffal that you might need for further extension. And with these level 4s, we typically want to make something like an Abyss Dweller, Jugaris for further extension, or perhaps Baguska to floodgate our enemies. There are also some useful link monsters we can summon, such as Yama, IP, and of course Little Knight. Either way, Fluffal Penguin is a brilliant extending monster. Now, to finish up this extension section, I'm going to mention Fluffal Octopus, since Fluffal Octopus allows us to set up for next turn and potentially out-resource our opponent. Octopus can, of course, when it's summoned, as of Chain Link 1, it can add your Fluffals or Edge Imps from your graveyard to your hand, and it can also, when fused with, recycle banished monsters back into the graveyard, and we primarily want to do this to set up Fluffal Wings. I'd say typical cards you would want to add from the graveyard back to the hand would be cards like Fluffal Sheep. Then you can potentially return Octopus back to the hand for further plays. Edgimp Scythe, sometimes we need to fuse with Scythe, and it's just good to just like add it to your hand for potentially a Cruel Whale summon in the opponent's turn. And then also with the banished cards, you can banish Edgimp Scythe to protect your monsters. Fluffal Octopus can recycle that for protection on future turns, but primarily Octopus would be played for the Fluffal Wings combo being recycled for later turns and just overwhelming the opponent with drawing cards and searching for massive an advantage gain on them. Now, all of this is to achieve what? The end pieces. Now, for Fluffals, the end pieces are different with every single format, but almost every single format shall try to perhaps make Abyss Dweller to shut off the graveyard effects. In the TCG specifically, Totally Awesome is still illegal, and we would perhaps use Penguin, special summon Dolphin to make Bahamut Shark, and Bahamut Shark can then summon Totally Awesome, and this is rather powerful as it allows us access to an early Omni-Negate. Other cards that modern formats will make, as we mentioned, Yama. Yama can search Shavara. Shavara can then pop either a Fiend or a set Toy Vendor, summon itself, and then we can make Rage with it. And this will search us Escape of the Unchained, and Rage can potentially make a monster like Little Knight. And then also, since Yama's in the graveyard, we can potentially summon back some Fiends that have been sent over our turn, such as Baguska, and if it's brought back this way, it shall have no materials. When it comes back to your turn, it should just go back to the graveyard. Master Duel is different. Of course, Totally is not legal in that format, but Appaloosa and Sprite Elf are still legal. You might notice there are quite a few Link 2 monsters, and so Sprite Elf can provide that protection and revival for, again, out-resourcing your opponent, and Appaloosa, of course, is just a bunch of negates. Now, Duel Links is rather specific in that it has a skill that allows us to swap out our Edgimps, which provides a unique link for consistency, mostly. Most recently, Puzzlemo has been used in combination with Frightfur Tiger, which is level 6, and either with Frightfur Sheep and Edgimp Sabers, or perhaps Sabertooth. 2 level 6 Fiends are made on the field with Puzzlezemo's effect in order to make High King Caesar, which is a powerful endboard monster for Duel Links, at least. Some other builds just attempt to draw into via Penguin's draws and Toy Vendor draws into potential hand traps, such as Vela. And also, because of the skill being able to swap Edgimps, sometimes Sabers is swapped at the end of the turn for Edgimp Scythe to guarantee that Edgimp Scythe fusing into Cruel Whale on the opponent's turn for a disruption. And it's more consistent thanks to the skill. Now, going turn 2, of course, Fluffals are attempting to break the board and OTK. All versions and formats of Fluffal do play probably one Frightfur Tiger at least for the mass destruction on the field. And sometimes you can protect Tiger's effect with chain linking and chain blocking your opponent's effect negation. Similar can be said for Frightfur Cruel Whale, and Cruel Whale also provides that massive attack to essentially beat over quite a few opponent's monsters. Of course, Duel Links is lagging behind both of these other formats in terms of some more modern boss monsters. In both of them, I'd say Guardian Chimera is played for a similar reason Frightfur Cruel Whale is played, except the draw effect can also sometimes fix some of your hands. And of course, Chimera can be a bit of a tower as being non-targetable, since polymerization most likely is in the grave. And of course, they have access code Talker. Fluffal can make plenty of link material, so access code is mostly on the table. Duel Links instead will perhaps play a few more of the Frightfur fusion monsters. So this includes Sabertooth, again as mentioned for potentially making High King Caesar, and also bring back removal cards such as Frightful Kraken, which can targeting send monsters to the graveyard. And also quite uniquely, Duel Links Fluffal players play Frightful Bear, since the skill can essentially, without interruption, take an opponent's monster and attach it to Frightful Bear, which is quite powerful removal. We shall now move on to the replays to see these steps in more detail. Now, beginning with these deck list sections, we're starting off with this TCG deck list. Now, this is before incorporating engines such as Fiendsmith or Azamina, since there might be a ban list shortly after this video is published, and I'd rather just stick with the base engine, and at least with some of the unchained cards that have stuck around for quite a while now. So in this TCG list, of course, we are allowed 3 Foolish Burial Goods, which is brilliant for consistency, and this kind of opens up the last quarter of our deck to allowing quite a few hand traps, at least for Fluffal standards. In order for Fluffal to be a more competent deck, it would require new support being printed that could shave off a lot of the main engine to of course allow perhaps a third or perhaps half the deck to be non-engine, aka probably hand traps. And as you can see, there are plenty of more Link and XYZ monsters than fusion monsters in Fluffal. Modern Fluffal usually just plays 2 Cruel Whale, 1 Tiger. And of course, this version of the deck allows us to have Baphomet and Totally Awesome. We should now get on to the replay. So starting off the TCG replay, we can see this is a pretty decent hand. We have our setup and a few hand traps, a nice mix of engine and non-engine, and also we have Fluffal Wings in hand, so this will be slightly different from our regular plays. Starting with the setup card, we use Foolish Burial Goods. We're going to find our way to our setup monster Dolphin. Penguin, short special out Dolphin. And with Dolphin we shall send Sabers instead of Wings, since it's in our hand. And we can pitch the Wings via Vendor effect. We get lucky and get a Fluffal Dog off the top, which we reveal and we can special summon. So a surprise extension for ourselves. We decide to insulate our plays by going Bahamut into Toad, and then we choose to activate Fluffal Wings, completing the setup stage of our game. The next of this is all just extension. I use Sabers to set up a Penguin, allowing to special summon it. Start linking off, since I have yet to find any Edgeump Chains or Frightful Patchwork, so this shall be a fusionless turn 1. I return Dog to hand, so I can get another special with this fresh Fluffal Penguin. Make Jigaras, and I decide to draw cards to see what else I could potentially draw into. It's possible that I could have instead specialed Penguin to continue the extension. Unfortunately, I still draw no Chain or Frightful Patchwork, and so I decide to then just go into the Unchained line. Now, I set Impermanence, and of course we have our set Escape the Unchained. We can bring back Rage with Yama, and also Vendor can be popped by Yama, which shall allow us to activate Herald of the Orange Light. This overall is either a modest or low end board for TCG Fluffal. Now hopping over to Master Duel, we're looking at Little Lamp's unfluffed build. Now, since he posted this list, we are only allowed to play 2 Max C now, so one of which I've replaced with a copy of Fluffal Octopus. In the extra deck, I've added Abyss Dweller, and instead of Nightmare Unicorn, we are playing SP Little Knight. Now, onto the game. Starting this game, we have an easy way of getting Toy Vendor into the graveyard. This way we can get to our setup monster, Fluffal Dolphin. With Bear also in the graveyard, Wings can banish to draw our cards, completing our setup phase. One of our cards that we drew into was Frightful Patchwork. This allows us to extend by fusing with Fluffal Penguin. We choose Chain here so we can go to the Cruel Whale repair line. Fluffals typically want to fuse to the center or side zones in order to play for cross sheep. Penguin 1, Chain 2. With Chain, we're actually in search for Frightful Repair here. Now, Cruel Whale can send a Frightful to the grave, and this way we can summon Penguin back from the graveyard with Repair. After Cruel Whale has been used, we can make Yama. Only once Shavar has been cleared from the field can we start summoning Fluffals again. Depending on your board, you'd rather summon Appaloosa or potentially Elf. And so now with this hand, we shall have access to, of course, summoning Baguska, back with Yama, our negates, Rage into Little Knight effect, Escape the Unchained, and of course Maxi, as well as our set called by. That comes the end of this play. The last format that we shall be covering shall be Duel Links. Now, in this format we of course have access to Edge Imp Retrofit, which allows us to swap our Edge Imps and potentially use Frightfur Bear as a removal card. Being allowed to swap our Edge Imps allows Sabers to be searched with our Toy Vendor or Dog, and this can then search, like swap into our other potential Edge Imps, increasing consistency overall. Now, of course, we are still going to try and do our Toy Vendor to set up Dolphin, to set up our Wings draws. However, eventually we shall use our Fluffals to link into Puzzle Amino. And then we are more likely to fuse into Frightfur Tiger on our turn 1. And we can do this with Fluffal Cat in order to get Polly back, and then make Sabertooth. And the idea is that we summon Sabertooth to Puzzle Amino to change it to a level 6. Another way of doing this, if we don't have Cat, we can of course summon Frightfur Tiger, use Fluffal Sheep to bring back Edge Imp Sabers, again to Puzzle Amino's Arrow. And with 2 level 6s, we can of course XYZ Wave High King Caesar, which is a powerful disruption in Duel Links. And then our potential final interruption will be Edge Imp Scythe interfusing into Cruel Whale on their turn. Now, onto the replay. Okay, now starting with this turn, we actually have a rather ideal setup. We can get Toy Vendor access via Bear. Patchwork can immediately allow us to set up Frightfur Tiger. We can set up our Wings draws. We shall search for Fluffal Sheep. We can now recycle Dolphin with Sheep. Make our Link monster. We can use Repair to recycle Tiger in the future. Now we can summon our XYZ monster. Yeah, and so now we have 3 interruptions, including Caesar and Scythe into Whale. I hope you enjoyed all of these lists and gameplay and this Fluffal crash course. Now, if you'd want to see more Turn 2 gameplay, or perhaps some new flashy ways to play Fluffal, then see you next time on the Guild of Gurus.